that tend to have a lot of misconceptions. So hopefully today I'm going to kind of like debunk some of those misconceptions. Um, Before I start, I kind of wanted to talk about Sadia. So this is important to me because as someone who's worked in cybersecurity, it tends to have very few women. I'm going to go more into details and like the figures in cybersecurity and why you should consider it as a career. But Sadia is all about helping Black, Asian, and minority ethnic women build cybersecurity careers through e-learning, virtual programs, and a tailored jobs board. And the reason why I did this was because there's very few women and very few women who look like me. And a lot of the issues that tend to happen in the online space, especially now with COVID, where everything is online, we definitely need to think more about the safeties and the parameters in which we operate in the online space. And that's why cybersecurity is important, but also why we desperately need more diversity in the industry. So welcome to the class. What are we going to discuss today? So hopefully by the end of the session, you should be able to have a better understanding of the cybersecurity industry. So I'm going to be discussing about the different roles that are within the industry, but also the salary expectations and certifications that you might think about getting if you do want to enter the industry. I would also talk about the CIA TRIAD. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to grasp what it is and why it's important, but also for you guys to have a basic knowledge of security management. And finally, I would love you guys to understand risk management and risk assessment. I will like to note that this workshop is very, very beginners friendly. So we're only going to cover the basic security concepts because cybersecurity is a huge industry and there are so many things to cover, but I've tried to make it into bite size so it's easy for you guys to understand. Before I start, I think with cybersecurity, I want to start with the definitions and concepts. So there are two different fields within cybersecurity. So the first one I would say is information security. So that's all about protecting information, protecting data from unauthorized access. So making sure the right people who should be able to access it have access to it. And to also stop it from being modified, disrupted, having corruption or destruction. So it's ensuring that the data or the information is one that is accurate, it's one that is reliable, but also it's one that comes from a credible source and it's protected because it's not been modified and it's not been, the wrong people haven't had access to it. That means that the data is safe, essentially. So that's what you have as information security. And that tends to be the non-technical side of security. So when you think about GDPR, when you think about just conversations about information governance, information security, that's the aspect of it. So that's more of the policy, I would say, like the non-technical side of it. While information systems security is the act of protecting the systems that hold and process critical data. So that can be the computer, that can be a phone, it could be the network, so like Wi-Fi, it could be IoTs. So if you think about Alexa, that's an IoT. So it's pretty much systems that hold critical data. So security has to deal with the data itself, while the information system security has to deal with the body or the machine that holds that data. So now we're going to talk about the cybersecurity industry and why I think you should consider a career in cybersecurity. So according to the Cybersecurity Ventures, there'll be up to 3.5 million job openings by 2021. But however, if we look at the global numbers, women make 20% of the global workforce for cybersecurity. And then when you're looking at the gender gap that exists for Black and ethnic minority women, it's even smaller. Now, what I will say is that although there has been progress from 11% in 2013 to 20% now, in the UK, if we're looking specifically at where we are now, the industry, 15% of it is women and 16% of it are from minority groups. So again, it's very, very white male dominated and there's very, very little diversity. So this is a huge issue that we have within the industry of cybersecurity. And because there is such a gap in regards to how many people have those skills, we're seeing that there's a lot of demand, there's a lot of gap. So there is definitely a huge scope for you to grow within the industry. So I'll definitely suggest that. Um, Now, moving on to what type of jobs are you likely to get in within cybersecurity? So I will say that these are the popular technical roles. So you have your security software developers. So that's pretty much having privacy by design, but also looking at ways you can secure a system. A SOC analyst is very similar to an incident reporter. So a SOC analyst is a system security operating center analyst. So you're analyzing the data that you're getting from those who are monitoring what's going on. So let's say there is a ethical hacking or not ethical hacking, there's like a hack that's happened within a system. There are people who would actually go to gather what has actually happened. And then your SOC analyst is the person who analyzes the attack to then think, okay, this is where our vulnerabilities are. And these are the likely things that we should do to minimize those vulnerabilities. Then you have your certified ethical hackers. So essentially they're hackers, but they're ethical because they hack a system to, again, to see what vulnerabilities are within the system. Then you have your security architect. So that's a person who thinks about security from the very beginning. So let's say you're in a workplace, you have to think about like the physical controls. So who enters the building? And when you're thinking about that, you're thinking about, okay, everyone has to have a staff card because that's how you ensure that those who are authorized to enter the building can enter the building. Then in some places, especially in government, there are places where are secured based on that area having very, very critical data. And then you might need a higher security clearance to access those areas. Again, a security architect will think about both not only the online architecture of like how secure is the system, but they will also think about the physical control, to think about how secure is the physical space within where the business operates. But they also think about the administrative controls as well. So if you get a new job, you know that they normally create your email address and they give you a password or something before you start. And the reason why that is because they are stopping that administrative access. You can't create your email, because if you're able to create your email, the likelihood is that somebody can then duplicate that and even give access to potential criminals. So there are specific people who focus on doing emails and stuff like that. So you block the different processes within the where the business operates, because you're trying to ensure that certain privileges are not given to people that might cause them to misuse that, if that makes sense. As I'm going, if you do have any questions, do let me know. There is a Q&A in the end. And then you have your cryptographer. So when you think about cryptography, that is all about ensuring that your data is secure. So you're essentially encrypting a data to ensure the security of that data. So when WhatsApp says that, the platform itself is secure, it's because the system automatically encrypts the messages, which is why it's unable, people who are not in the system are unable to actually get the information to your messages because it's encrypted. So that's the job of a cryptographer. They encrypt the data sets that exist within an organization. And then you have your cyber and digital forensics. If you do think about forensics, it's similar to that, but again, it's just understanding better the system and then thinking about, okay, what are the vulnerabilities, what are the risks? And then you have your CISO. So as you guys know, you might know an CEO, which is like a chief executive officer. A CISO is a chief information security officer. And essentially what they do is they're the highest point. So they ensure that the whole organization is secure. So that is what a lot of people in cybersecurity tend to aspire to. They tend to aspire to become a CISO. So the non-technical roles within cybersecurity, and I just kind of want to go back actually to the technical. when I talked about the systems, if you realize a lot of these roles have to do with the systems, apart from the cryptographer, but again, it has to still do with systems because you're sending an information from one system to another. Now, when we're going into the non-technical, that has to do with the information security and not the information system security. So you're looking at governance, you're looking at policy and procedures. You're looking at the IT auditor. So the auditor checks to ensure that the company is being compliant to the governance or the standards that has been set. So the global standard now that a lot of people use, especially in the UK, is the ISO 27001. And that's the information security system standard. Then you have your threat intelligence. So my last role was in that. That's you assessing the threats of an organization to a particular, assessing maybe a particular threat to the organization, and then giving updates to, what vulnerabilities exist, what trends are available, what can you see. Then you have your cybersecurity project manager. So that is pretty much a project manager who works or resides in cybersecurity. And then you have your compliance analyst, and that's kind of analyzed. And again, how compliant are we as an organization? And then you have risk management, which again assesses the risk. So when we're looking at risk, I'm going to explain that later, but that's a very important role. And then you have your business continuity. So with business continuity, it's pretty much if an organization has had an attack, how quickly do they bounce back? So that could be putting things in place that, let's say we have a system with X amount of data, we might decide that actually we'll split that data into two different systems. One can reside in London, but another one can reside in Leeds. So if a burgle or something happens to, or even a fire happens to the London office, we have a backup system in Leeds. So again, that's thinking about business continuity. And that's all about backups and all about how does the company or a business organization, how quickly do they bounce back from an attack to ensure that the business still goes on, hence the title business continuity. So now I'm going to talk about certifications and salary expectations. So when we are about certifications, the UK standard is the CISMP from BCS, and the American one is CompTIA Security Plus. And those two, I would say, if you want to go for more of the information security, then those two are really good. But if you want to go more for the information systems, if you want to look at networks, for example, I would suggest CompTIA Network Plus and Cisco CCNA. But I will say for networks, the CCNA tends to be recognized more than the CompTIA Network Plus. And then you also have your Cisco Certified Cyber Ops Associates. So if you do have a software background, especially you guys who are learning the code, the Cisco Certified Cyber Ops Associate certification might be a good one to get. What I will also say is that with the CISMP, and the training in the UK tends to be very expensive. So it tends to be between 1,000 to £3,000. But the CompTIA Security Plus, you can get a good deal in regards to maybe looking at the videos on Udemy or at a specific instructor who has like a good review, and then doing it yourself. So a lot of people, though it's an American certification, a lot of UK people tend to go for that option because it's cheaper. Now, when we're looking at salary expectations, the starting salary falls between 25,000 to 35,000. But I will say this also depends on your location. If you're in London, it's definitely going to be in the higher end, while if you're outside of the London, it tends to be in the lower end. And then if you are now more experienced and you're now like a senior cybersecurity analyst, or you have like that mid-level experience, then you're looking at 35,000 to an excess of 60,000. And then if you're kind of like in the leadership position and going into like the CISO position and that, or like a director position, then you're looking at £70,000 and higher. In America, obviously, because it's very different to the UK, the salary expectation is a lot higher. But from what I've been told, it's very hard for you to break in the industry there due to certain laws. But this is like the salary expectation if this is an industry that you're hoping to get into. So now we're going to look at security management. So what I will say are the key terms to kind of like remember is authentication, authorization, accountability, accounting, audit trail, and non-repudiation. So we're going to start with the CIA triad. Now, the CIA triad is like the holy grail of cybersecurity or information security. So that has to deal with that, information and data should always be protected or governed by these three things. So confidentiality, availability, and integrity. So when we're thinking about confidentiality, again, it's ensuring that the right people have access to the information and that the wrong people don't have access to that information. And that has to do with authentication. So an example of this could be with your email address now. If you're signing into your email, or let's say you're at school or you're trying to get into your university or student area, you have a username and you have a password. That is your authentication. That certifies that you are the right person to that account. Then you have your access controls. Now, if you're at work, you may realize that there are certain things that might say, are you the administrator? And that again has to do with access controls. And finally, cryptography, which I was talking about, is encrypted information. And when we think about encrypted information, it's pretty much, let's say, I'll talk about like the basics of cryptography. Let's say I'm trying to give an information to Charlene, for example. I might send her a document, encrypt the document with a code, and then give the key number to her. And then when Charlene gets that information, she can then use that key access to enable her to open that information. So again, that's literally what cryptography is. And then it's looking at, how do we restrict access to the information? How do we ensure that, the information, we kind of like restrict what can be done with that information. So if you do work in government, and I keep talking about government because that's kind of like my past life, I was working in public sector in central government, and that you have different categories. So you have your secret, you have your personal, you have your sensitive, or it could be different levels depending on where you work. And then secondly, we have integrity. So that's ensuring that that there's integrity of that information, that that the right people created that information. So that has to do with how accurate is that information, how valid is that information, has it, you want to make sure that that information hasn't been altered, modified in any way without proper authorization. And how do you ensure this consistency? You do that through digital signatures. So a very basic digital signature is your email address. When you send an email address to somebody else, they're able to know that you're the person who sent that based on your signature. So that's another like example of digital signatures. Then you have your hashing and audit. Again, auditing allows you to double check your information, especially like in the UK, you're auditing to see whether your company is abiding to the ISO 27001 standard. And then it's verifying, ensuring that who created the source, who can update the data, who can delete that data. So integrity is ensuring that that information is valid, essentially. And then finally is availability. So you want to make sure that the people who should be having that information have easy access to that information. And then you do that through backups, contingency planning, disaster recovery, ensuring that, there's always, that data is always available. So if something happens, like I said, if there's a fire, if you lose like the system, or something happens and there's a virus and the system crashes, that information is still available. Same way, like, I'm sure at uni or at your workplace, you tend to like save information in different places just to ensure that you don't lose that information. So that's what availability is all about. So we're going to move on to the next one, which is the 3 A's. So think about batteries. That's how I tend to like remember this. I think about batteries, but it's 3 A's. So the 3 A's, the first one is authentication. So again, it's like when a person's identity is established with proof or confirmed by a system. With this, you want to make sure that the right person has access to that information, and the right person how do you do that? It's through something So that could be your password, your username. It could be something you are. It could be your credit card or your license. It could be something you have. So that has to do with like biometrics, your fingerprints, and it's something you do. So that's your voice or your handwritten signature. And finally is somewhere you are. So it could be location, it could be GPS. Now at your workplace, sometimes you realize that very easy to kind of use your laptops in certain places. And that has to do with like location factor, because the computer knows that it's in the confinement of your workplace. So therefore it's safe. And then, with Alexa, that's the voice. That's something you do. And that's how Alexa knows that it's you. Same with your phone. So this is all about authentication, is ensuring that the person has the right identity. And then because of that, they're able to have access to it. So again, it's just ensuring the right person has access to the right information. The second one is authorization. So that's when you give access to this. So again, the best way to think about it is your staff card. Because you have your staff card, it means you're authorized to enter the building. So that's the way I would say you look at authorization. Email address, because you have the username and the password, you're able to access that. And that tends to be on a need to know basis or role based, based on like the staff card. So now we're looking at accountability or accounting. So in the UK, it tends to be accountability, but in the US, it tends to be accounting. I just put these two side by side so that in case you do see them, because sometimes, especially in this industry, tends to be used a lot, which can confuse people. So that's holding individuals accountable, is ensuring that there's an audit trail. So you want to track the data, you want to track the computer usage and the network resources. And then you have non-repudiation. So it means that you have proof that someone has taken an action. So this could be, a staff having access to their own system. And you wonder, why do I need my username and stuff? It's not just for you to have space to put your stuff, but it's also that if anything does happen, it's traceable back to you, so they know who's done what. So that's what non-repudiation means. And then now we're going to go more into like defense in depth. So it's kind of like looking at this as like a security architect if you're managing information. So at this side, we have prevention, and this other side, we have monitoring and response. So I'm going to start with this bottom two. So when we're looking at prevention, that's looking at like, security awareness training, ensuring that the staff know what to do. So one of the biggest issues with companies that are facing at the moment has to do with email phishing, with employees clicking on the wrong link, which gives hackers access to their system. So you need to have that security awareness training. You need to have a risk management framework so you understand what the risk levels are within your workplace. It's also IT security governance. How does the organization as a whole, how do they govern information security? Who is responsible for what? Then you also have your penetration testing. Penetration testing is another word for hacking. So essentially, someone will try and hack or penetrate into the system. And by doing that, they're able to show you these are the vulnerability areas of your system. And then continuous improvements, also security policies. So I think you would know, like in some workplaces, they will say, always have a clear desk. If you're leaving your computer, make sure you lock it, and all those things. That's just policies and compliance and procedures. And then in the other side, monitoring. And that's when you're looking at your digital forensics. That's when you have like different tools like security management dashboards to kind of show the security levels and the vulnerability levels of your system. Then we're going to now go into like data security. That has to do with how to ensure your data is safe. So that could be through encryption, that could be through sanitization. So, sometimes if you want to give somebody, especially if you're working in an organization that is quite secret, depending on what type of organization is it, they might sanitize the data. So like the same report that they give to the internal team will definitely be a different report that they will give to the outside world or the public. And by the time they give it to the public, they have sanitized that report to ensure that critical data is not within that report. So that's pretty much what sanitization is. Now you have your application security, that has to do with like firewalls, monitoring and scanning. Then you have your endpoint security that has to do with like firewall, DLPs, hosts. That's kind of like similar to network, but it's looking at the endpoint at like what is the user seeing at the end. And then you have like your network security, which also has to do with like mobile security, messaging, ensuring like with the firewalls and IoTs that things haven't been like been tampered with. I think recently IoTs has been like a great cause of concern because people can use of a large point of IoTs to try and penetrate into another system. I think there was a case in the US when somebody was able to use 1,000 Alexas or IoT devices just from a location to try and penetrate into like another system. So that has to do with like network security. Then you have your parameter security that has to do with like malware. That's just ensuring that what are like physical security, what are the parameters in which you kind of operate in. So this will probably be more of like the security architect's role, but I just felt like if you wanted to kind of understand cybersecurity in the depth, this is what it looks like of how many things needs to be secure. Another point that hasn't been added here is cloud security, which has kind of like been changing over the years, but that's when you'd be looking at what are your third-party contracts, because when we're looking at cloud, it tends to be a third-party organization system that you're using, and you can't necessarily you don't have access to change or to modify the third parties, what they're doing, or to control it. So there's a lot of like legality that has to do with like that relationship, and that kind of comes under cloud security. And now we're going to go into risk management and risk assessment. So key terms to remember here would be asset, threats, vulnerabilities, risk management, risk assessment, and then the risk response categories. So I'm going to first, to kind of like start off with some of the words that I've been using. So I've been using vulnerability a lot. I've been using risks, but there's also assets, threats. So an asset is like composes of people, property, information within an organization. So anything that has value. So when we're talking about information security, the information has value. That's why it needs to be secure. So that's what an asset would be. Now, when you're looking at threats, it's pretty much anything that can exploit a vulnerability, whether that's intentionally or accidentally. And that is done to either obtain, damage, or destroy an asset. And then when we're looking at vulnerability, that's a weakness of an asset or within an asset that can be exploited by threat. And then when we have risks, that's the potential for loss, damage, or destruction of an asset when a threat exploits a vulnerability. And then the calculation for a risk is what is your threat times vulnerability. But going back to like vulnerability, with what I said with employees, for example, if your employees haven't been kind of trained to know what to do in regards to like what type of links they shouldn't click on, because of that, that is a vulnerability within your system. And how an organization might solve that vulnerability would be through security awareness training, but also they can block certain websites. So a lot of email phishing can also come through message social networks and social media sites. So some workplaces, you may realize that you actually can't access emails, your personal email, or access your social media platforms because it has been blocked to reduce that threat, if that makes sense. Now, going back to like risk management, I'm seeing, okay. Going back to risk management now, the basic definition is risk management is the process of identifying, assessing, monitoring, and limiting risk to an acceptable level. So you would realize that, not all risks, it's not all risk that you can kind of like destroy completely. There would always be risk, but at what level is it acceptable? And then the expanded definition is that risk management provides a systematic, repeatable process for identifying, assessing, prioritizing, monitoring, tracking, and regularly communicating the status of threats, risks, issues, and action items to management, stakeholders, and executive level decision makers. So a lot of decision makers will want to know, like, what is the risk, what risk level are they operating under. And this would also fall under the role of a threat intelligence analyst as well. So the primary goal of a risk management is to ensure that risks are reduced to a level that an organization will accept, because like I said, some risks you just can't change. So that's kind of like an important note to add there. Then you have your risk assessment. So I talked about assessing, monitoring. What does that mean? So there is a procedure or process which you kind of have to follow. So I'll start with the definition of a risk assessment. So risk assessment is where risks are identified and assessed, and is the first step in the risk management process. So an example of the process would be, first of all, you have to identify and categorize your risks. Secondly, you need to assess each risk probability and impact. So what is the probability of this happening? And if it does happen, what is the impact? Then the third one is you want to assign a risk score. So each risk should have like a score. So you can kind of understand, okay, this is rated a 7, but this is rated a 4. So maybe because of that, we should prioritize the 7 than the 4. So that is pretty much why you would want to have a risk score. And then you respond accordingly based on what your risk assessment is. So you now have your qualitative risk assessment. So with this, I will say that you would have to think about the equation that I talked about. So your risk assessment score is your probability times your impact. So I've done, like, here you have like high, moderate, low, moderate, high, and then you have your impact on one side, and then at the bottom you have your probability. So the number 1, if it's like 1 then it's 1. If it's 1 2, then it's like 2. So like when it's 1, 2, and 3, that's your safe, that's like green, that's okay, that's what we would call an acceptable risk. But if it's in the 4 more than 3, so like 4 to, I would say 4 to, I would say like 8, then that's when you're looking at your moderate risk. And then when it's at a 9, which is the impact and the probability is quite high, then that would be 9. So probability is like the likelihood that a risk would occur, while the impact is a negative impact of a risk if it occurs. And the probability and impact are given numbers. So if we go again about like the risk assessment process, you're identifying, you're kind of like assessing the impact and probability, you're giving it a score, and then you're acting in response to the score. So this is a quantitative risk assessment, and basically explain what I was talking about in the previous slide, but in a visual manner. And yeah, so like based on the risk, you would then choose an appropriate response measure, which we're going to talk about in the following slides. So there are different categories or different ways in which you can respond to a risk. So what I will say is that the first one you have is avoidance. So you just, the process of eliminating a risk by not engaging in activity. So you avoid a risk by eliminating its source altogether. So with the example I gave about the email phishing and like the attacks, an example could be you block access to the sites that causes those kind of vulnerabilities. It could be like if they go to a site, the computer has a high chance of getting virus. So what they do is like they just block access to that site. So that's avoidance. Then you have acceptance. So accepting a identified risk, meaning no action will be taken because the risk assessment score is low. So because it's low, it's acceptable. It's one that you can manage. Then you have your mitigation. So that is the process of taking steps to actually minimizing the impact of the risk. And then you have your transference, which is transferring the responsibility of a risk to a third party, such as insurance. So sometimes what organizations they do is they have a cyber insurance that if an attack happens, the insurance covers them. So that would be a transference example. With mitigation, it would be this happens, so these are the steps. And then that's what you would probably need an analyst for to do that part of the mitigation. And then finally, you have a residual risk. So the risk remains when after the risk that remains after the risk mitigation and all the transference activities has taken place. So let's say that you've transferred it to a third party, but the risk still exists, or certain risks still exist after that process. Then you would have your residual risks, which is risks that can't be altered or changed, essentially. So we're now looking at risks and threats. So there's a difference between the risk and threats. So risks can be monetary. So it could be money. It could be a reputation of the organization. It could be a loss of assets. So whether that's a person, property, place, it could be intellectual property, or it could be a legal risk. And the threats tends to be natural. So again, like I talk about fires, it could be a flood, it could be unintentional, or it can be intentional. And threats, when you think about threats, think about outside actors. When you're looking at a risk, it's more internal, what's happening to me, while threat is what is an outside actor that's infected me, if that makes sense. So that's how probably the best way to look at risks tend to be internal, while threats tends to be external threats, essentially. Before we go, we're now going to have like a question time. So this is kind of like the end of the session. So we're going to be doing a quiz just to kind of get everybody engaged, because I know I have done a lot of talking. But it's also for you guys to get a better understanding of everything that I've discussed in this session. So I would put the questions, read it out, and then I need people to give me answers by putting either A, B, C, D. So yeah, A, B, C, D in the chat section, and I can kind of like see what everyone thinks the answer is. And then the next slide would be the actual answer itself. So let's start. So the question one is, let's say you've been employed as a network administrator for Pretty Little Thing, and you've been tasked with implementing a data encryption on all web-based traffic on your intranet or your company's LAN, so that the data can only be viewed by those it's intended to be viewed by. So what are you trying to ensure? Are you trying to ensure that the information is confidential? Are you trying to ensure the integrity of the information that is available? Or are you looking at defense in depth? Okay. A lot of A's. All right. People have been listening. Yes, you're right. The answer is confidentiality. Because again, confidentiality is ensuring that those who have access to the information, that they actually have access to it. So great job, everyone. It shows me that you guys are all listening. The next question, remember the batteries 3A's framework. So
sorry to cut you, Stephanie. Just to make it easier, I'm gonna launch a poll so it's easier to kind of see A, B, C, or D, just in case we have like a balance between two.
Okay.
Yeah. Over to you.
Okay. Well, we only have 2 more questions. I think it's 2 or 3 more questions, but it's fine. So with question 1, I'm trying to see what I think we've already had the answers. So I want to see what everyone has voted, and then we'll go straight into question 2. Oh. Okay. That was for question 1, which was A. So I think we're going to now go into question 2. Would you be able to do another poll for question 2?
Yeah. So just imagine it's question 2 rather than question 1.
Okay. Let's all imagine this question. Okay. So I'll just repeat the question. I've seen 2 people put D's. Please put the D in the quiz so that we can all see if that's what you think it is. So in the AAA framework, Dash verifies a user's identification via the process of logging into a system. What do you think it is? Is it A, accounting, B, auditing, C, authorization, or D, authentication? What are we trying to do? We're waiting for 14 more people to vote. Okay, I'm seeing A, I'm seeing C, and I'm seeing D. Okay. I'm going to now move on to show you guys the answers to see who won. The answer is D, authentication, because it's all about verifying, right? Ensuring that the right people have access to the system. Again, same process, but this time is authentication, similar to that of an email and a password of what I said, or having a staff card. So we're now going to go into the next question. I'm going to look at, I think some people said that they thought it was C. Yeah, authorization is very different from authentication. So they're quite similar. So authentication verifies that you are the person, where authorization, I'm given access to somebody. It's authorization has to do more with administrative controls, while authentication, it's you put in the right, it's kind of like tends to be role based. It's very, very all about verification. So we're now going to go, let me remove these so I can actually see the next question. So now for the next question, question 3. Your staff has been performing a qualitative risk assessment for a pretty little thing. They've identified a risk with both a high probability and a high impact. And they believe that this can be effectively managed by them outsourcing it to a third-party vendor. If you choose to outsource this activity to a vendor and pay them for their services, what type of risk response category are we utilizing? Is it A, avoidance? Is it B, acceptance? Is it C, mitigation? Or is it D, transference? See a lot of votes. Okay, I'm seeing A, I'm seeing B, I'm seeing D. What do you guys think? Okay, I see some people voted. All right. We now wait for 9 seconds so that I would show the answer. But it seems no one said C. That's interesting. Okay. Now to show the answer is D, transference. And the reason why it's D is because you're transferring the responsibility to somebody else. And in this case, it's a third-party vendor. That's why it's D. So if you think about the process of like, what are the different types? Acceptance is, you're accepting it. Avoidance is that, you destroy the source of the problem completely. So that could be you blocking access to a site. In some cases, it might be, unfortunately, sacking an employee. Acceptance could be you accepted that this has happened. Mitigation is that you're taking steps to the solution, while D is you're taking the problem to somebody else. And now it's question time, which I think I have left enough time for question time. So please, if you have any questions about anything that I've talked about, whether that's all about the cybersecurity industry or about security management or risk management or the CIA TRIAD, please, please, please ask. Feel free.
Hi, may I ask a question?
Yeah, feel free.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say thank you for your presentation. It was really detailed, and I feel like I've learned so much, especially coming from like zero knowledge. My question is about your background and your route into the cybersecurity industry, and maybe we could hear more about furnishful.com. Thank you.
Okay.
So Stephanie is not the founder of Furnishful. She's actually the founder of Sodai, which is totally different.
I'm sorry.
I think you're thinking ahead of the next Empowerment Day, but that's great.
I'm sorry, I misread.
It's okay.
No worries. All right, let me go back to Sadia, and then I'll talk about how I entered the industry. And then I'll go back. I've just seen a question by Julia. And then I think once I'm done with this, I'll go to your question. So how I got into the industry was a very interesting route. I was working in the Home Office. So I was working in a UK government department. And my first role was looking at digital transformation. So that was looking at the legal implications of implementing new technology, from us going from paper forms to online forms. And within that, I had to do a lot of risk management. And then with my second role, that was probably me entering the cybersecurity space. And that had to do with me looking at cyber threats, such as online child sexual exploitation, but also looking at physical threats, such as modern slavery, human trafficking, basically looking at technology-assisted cybercrime. And I don't come from like a technology background. Like my first degree and my second degree was in economics. But I will say what did help me was the internships that I did. So after my first year at university, I had the privilege of working for the BBC. And then I realized, they weren't really that great for, like they were lacking when it came to like certain things. So they were trying to enter or cover the African Fashion Week, but I didn't know a lot about social media. So I kind of stepped up to do that from my background in like PR and just doing stuff in fashion when I was younger. And then by doing that, then when the Ebola crisis happened, they decided to tackle fake news within the WhatsApp Act. So I think a lot of us, especially from an African background, you realize that WhatsApp is rife from doing like fake news, and especially when there's like a pandemic like an Ebola during that time, that can be very detrimental. So my role was literally doing the data entry, collecting numbers of people who wanted to be added into different WhatsApp groups, and then working with Medical Sans Frontières and WHO to get those information and then send it to those people. So we're essentially trying to tackle fake news. And then when that project came, because I had done previous social media work with them, they then called me back while I was in my second year to be working on that project. And then ever since I've done that role, I've kind of been pushed into more digital/legal roles. And one thing you will find with cybersecurity is that if you're from a law background, it's very, very easy for you to enter the field, because again, you're looking at protection. And if you're looking at like governance policies, regulations, then the law, like if you have a law background, it's very easy for you to enter the field. And why I decided to do CDO was because in my team, I was the only woman for a long time. And then even in like my whole department, I was the only Black person. And if I'm trying to like look at different issues that are affecting people from different walks from life, I can't be the only voice in the room. And there are certain things that I cannot, answer. Like I can't speak for people from an Asian background or people from a non-black background, because I just don't have the context for it. But if we had more women and we had more diversity, then some of the issues that I was seeing I felt like would have been easily solved. And at that time, I was already doing some work with women in my local area, teaching them Microsoft Excel skills. And it was just kind of like, oh, why don't you tell us how to get into the cyber security industry? And then it just connected that actually, why don't I just focus on this and actually show your different ways of how you can get into the field, but also simplify it? Because I feel like when people think about cybersecurity, they think about hackers, when it's bigger than that, and it's very, very, it's not as technical as people think it is. So to be fair, it shouldn't be that difficult. So I'm looking at the chats and I'm trying to like see.
I can go through some questions to help so that you don't have to go through the questions. First question we've got, could you go into a little bit more detail about a security software developer, please? I'm guessing what this person means is, you know, could you go into a bit more detail about, security software?
So for security software, I don't have too much knowledge of that, just because I'm not in like that side of cybersecurity, but I know that there are ways in which you can increase security. And if you are thinking probably from a theoretical framework, it will probably be having more knowledge about privacy from design. So if you're building an app, how do you ensure that privacy is at the forefront of that app? So that could be one field of it, but it could also be ensuring, again, when we talk about authentication, the CIA TRIAD, how do you ensure that the right people have access to the right information? And then when you think about that, I feel like that's when you're now thinking more into the security aspect of developing. So it could be ensuring that they might be, you know, now we have like the two-factor authentication. So once you sign in, you get a code on your phone to ensure that you're the right person who accessed that. Or like, let's say you accessed your Gmail account in a different country, you know, Google will tell you this was accessed here. So I would say like that's thinking more security. I wouldn't say that there is like unless you're thinking more of like a hacker, then I think like that would be more like the security technical side. But I think, let's say you're someone who's coding and creating stuff, it's just thinking, being more security minded. And if you are trying to go for a job interview in that field, it will probably be using like the CIA triad. You know, I was working on this website, and security is important to me, so I increased the authentication factor by ensuring that you had to use this, you know, 8-letter password using special just to ensure that the person's data is safe, or those who have access to the website have passwords that are not easily guessable. So it's, again, that's probably how I would bring those things together, but I wouldn't say that's like my field per se, for me to give you full clarity on that.
Thank you, Stephanie. Next question, what's the difference between information security and cybersecurity?
So cybersecurity is pretty much both of them in one. But when you're looking at information systems, that's when you go more into the technical side. When I talk about technical, I talk about the devices. So it could be a mobile phone, a laptop, it could be a desktop, it could be an IoT device, or it could be a network. While the information has to do with like the data, how do you ensure the data is safe? So I would say like that's how you would see it. Those two together gives you cybersecurity. So that's how I would view it.
Okay. Next question. I've got quite a lot of questions here. So the next question is, how do you transition from being a consumer web developer or web developer, consumer app or web developer, to a cybersecurity software dev role?
So again, with what I said is like, with taking the concepts that I've discussed with authentication, the CIA triad, is thinking about how you implementing those frameworks in your role. Because if you're applying to that job, you want to show them that you understand the thinking of someone in a security field. But also I would recommend getting a certification. So if you are a developer, going back to like the certifications, I would say like the CompTIA Security Plus is like everyone's favorite go-to, or the CISMP, but the CompTIA Security Plus is cheaper. And then once you get that, it's finding, okay, in my day-to-day job, how am I implementing these things to show like examples of when I have, thought about my role in a secure way. So it could be, like I said, changing passwords. It could be, and how are you ensuring, like if you're a website or an app developer, like how are you ensuring that that product that you're creating is safe and secure? And I would also say looking at the standards that are out there. With the UK one is ISO 27001. But if you're kind of going on a role that you might be working with American clients, then you would want to like read up on the NIST, so the NIST framework, because that's what they adhere to. So once you've done those knowledge and then you're able to show examples in your day-to-day job, it would be slightly easier for you to break into the industry. Another way is within your role, like right now, it's a lot of SMEs, find ways where you could work as a freelancer and then test these out, because then you're also getting experience from there and examples that you want to be highlighting in your interview. So that's how I would suggest you can transition if you're a software developer going more into the cybersecurity industry.
Thank you. That was really helpful. I guess the next two questions are probably similar to, I think you've answered it anyway. One question though, you mentioned about the qualifications we need to get before working with the government. Is it a necessity if you wish to work with a private organization? So are these qualifications necessary if you wanted to kind of work with a private organization?
Yeah, sorry. I hope I was only mentioning the public sector because that's my background. But no, if you want to work for the private sector, you definitely need a certification. It applies to both private and public. What I will say is if you're going to be working with government, you will definitely need a security clearance. Either you need to be SC cleared or DV cleared, but most, especially if you're working in the defense field, you definitely need to be SC cleared or DV cleared.
What does SC cleared, DV cleared mean?
So security clearance is just a higher security clearance, ensure that you've lived here for 5 years and stuff, while DV is developed vetting. So these are vetting security procedures that you have to go through. And the only reason why you have to go through these vetting is to ensure that you that you can be trusted. Essentially, they want to ensure that you're the right person for that job role, because you'll be interacting with a lot of sensitive data, hence why you need to get those security clearance. DV is not the highest. I mean, there are higher ones than that, depending on how, but that's I guess the highest one would probably be if you want to work for military or the government. But DV and SC are the two ones that you might see in certain applications. You don't need to get that before you start your role. If you start, once you get your job offer, your company will pay for you to get that security vetting. So don't worry about getting that by yourself. But it's just something I mentioned for you to think about that might occur while you're entering the field. Develop vetting is higher because sometimes they interview your family and friends just to get a better understanding of you. And it's just to it's just to ensure that
you gone.
Yeah, got this course. See you later.
Yeah.
It's just to ensure that, again, you're someone that they can trust, but also to ensure that there's nothing about you that can be used by somebody else for them to blackmail you, essentially.
I've had a lot of my colleagues in the past have gone through security clearance, and obviously it's quite a long process. Do you want to kind of give us information about the process of security clearance, and so that for anyone who wants to actually get into a role that requires that, they're kind of almost mentally prepared?
Yeah, so I think with the SE, it's a lot easier. There's a lot of forms to fill, but the questions they ask you is they ask you about your parents, they ask you about if you have kids, they ask you about your children, sometimes they ask you about your partners, and sometimes you have to put certain information that you may not even remember. So I kept having to call my dad to ask him questions, or my mom to ask him questions. It is quite intrusive. The SE is not as intrusive as a DV, but a developed vetting is very intrusive. So you have to be mentally prepared of being very transparent and open about who you are and what you do. Essentially, like I said, like they're trying to find out that there's nothing somebody else can use to blackmail you. So when you think about it like from that perspective, on how intrusive the developed vetting can get. But again, that depends. Like you only really, the DV only depends if you're trying to like work really in defense or if you're working in areas where they work with very, very sensitive data.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really, really comprehensive. The next question, why is it easier for people with a legal background to get into the cybersecurity industry?
It's because, especially with the area of privacy, so there was this certification, sorry I didn't put that, but since it's open like from the legal background, there's a certification called the CIPPE. That's a Certified Information Privacy Professional, and the Certified Information Manager. Now those two ones have to do with like GDPRs. It's literally looking at policies, regulations that organizations have, not organizations or countries have. So the CIPPE is the E is for Europe. They have one for America. So America now, there's a recent kind of thing that has been law that's been put in place called the California. It's a California privacy law. I can't remember the acronyms. I'm sorry, but it's a California privacy law, and it's kind of similar to the GDPR. But essentially, by having that certification, it shows that you're well versed in the laws and the regulations set by European Union or in the US context, and that. Because of that, you can then work as a privacy counsel, which is a role that most lawyers who want to like transition the field tend to go for. And that is basically you're a lawyer in the privacy space. So you're ensuring that the organization is adhering to the laws and you're not breaking any law, and you're adhering to the regulations set by the country that organization is in, which is why I say that it's very easy for those with a legal background to enter the field, normally going through that privacy counsel route.
Thank you. Danny has been super helpful during the whole session, and she's also mentioned actually that you can go to flag events if you want to transition from being a software developer into the cybersecurity industry. So going to threat modeling workshops, learning Auth0 and which was Cognito. So if that's something that you guys are interested in, I'm going to put it on the chat again so that everyone has access to that information. Next question. Which popular technical cybersecurity job role applies the most for people with a legal background?
Go back. So if you have I would probably say, I wouldn't say that there's a set job for those from a legal background, only because a lot of the legal roles tend to be in the non-technical space because of like the governance of like information security, but you can transfer some of those skills that you have from like a legal background. So maybe a security architect could be one because you are thinking about security holistically. So you're thinking about administrative procedures, physical procedures, as well as technical procedures. So I'll probably say security architect. If you're looking to transition into the technical side, that might be a good one if you're from a legal background.
Awesome. The last question that's written, how can one change from a privacy SME to working with a SEC plus /CEH?
Okay, how can one change from a privacy? So with that question, you have to be specific. So if you want to be a CEH, that means you want to be a ethical hacker. Then if that's what you want to do, then I would suggest getting the CEH certification. That one is quite expensive. It's almost like $2,000 if you want to get the training and the certificate. But I know that there's a CompTIA pen test one And if you do get those ones, you'll be able to transition. But unfortunately, cybersecurity is one of those places that they tend to ask you experience before you start. So again, I always talk about, like, if you already are working with like a privacy SME, try to see startups that are happening or popping up to see if you can lend your services to kind of get that experience under your belt, so that you have something to talk about when you get to that interview stage. If you want to work with Security Plus, that is less technical and has to do with more of like information security, information management.
Awesome. So I believe that's all of the questions. Are there any more questions? You guys can feel free to unmute yourself as well if you have any questions for Stephanie. Any other questions?
Let me try anyone. No questions, just see the questions, what I'll say.
I've got a question. So thank you for the talk, and it was actually really, really interesting hearing you talk about this, coming from, like, you, because you said you had a legal background and then you got into cybersecurity. Sorry about the train. So that was actually really, really interesting to hear about, because I came from the opposite side with technical stuff. So I guess for you, like, what's your favorite area when it comes to cyber security, and I guess especially in terms of the legal aspects?
Yeah, sure, I can answer that question. I would say my favorite aspect has to do with the cyber crime and tackling that. I'm about to start my PhD, and even my research, I'm looking at like what is the exploitation of privacy laws in Nigeria for cybercrime. So the reason why I'm very, very passionate about cybercrime is because when people think about cybersecurity, unfortunately, they tend to think about like the business aspect, corporate aspect of it, but they don't really look at the human rights aspect of it. And unfortunately, there is a lot of data that shows that women and young children are the most vulnerable in the online space, from online child sexual exploitation to women, with revenge porns, to women being harassed on the streets and videoed, and other things like that. So I'm very passionate about tackling that and ensuring that women are safe online, because I feel like with the physical space, there's a lot of laws to kind of govern what is right and what isn't right. While with the online space, because it's so new, there isn't a lot of set laws globally saying this is what's acceptable on the internet and this is what is not acceptable. And personally, in my personal capacity, that's kind of like the fight that I'm willing to fight within cybersecurity, and that's why it's probably my favorite part.
It's so interesting.
And I guess, like, as developers, how, from your point of view, how do we make that more important? Like, how do we make building tech more about protecting people than just building something because we can?
So I know I've mentioned this before, but it'll probably be, there's a concept called privacy by design, and it's pretty much ensuring that privacy is at the start of any design or any code. And you can probably research more into that. So it's kind of taking the principles of what we discussed today. Are you ensuring that the right people have access to the information? Are you ensuring that, the information has integrity, that people haven't changed, or, that's available, that there's a backup? So if you create app, for example, there's a backup app in case that app goes down. So it's thinking about using the principles that we've kind of discussed to think about, okay, in my work, how am I ensuring that I have the CIA triad? And I say that's why it's probably one of the most important aspects, is because once you look at it from that theoretical framework, you're then able to apply it into your own individual situation.
That's really good. I have a question actually for you, Stephanie. What does the future look like for you in the cybersecurity space? That's number one. And you mentioned about how you're really passionate about tackling cybercrime, especially in the context of Nigeria. What does success look like for eliminating cybercrime in the female space, and also in the the developing world as well?
I think for me, what success would probably look like is to have laws, have like a global set law of this is the standard of what is acceptable and not acceptable in the online space, and also ensuring that lawyers and judges are trained with that law, so that, because I feel like for me, and maybe coming from like a policy background and in economics background, is that a lot of laws, or a lot of like, they're good ideas, but it's always poorly implemented. So ensuring that the implementation aspect of it is well thought out. So to me, that's what a success looks like, is to ensure the laws are in place, but also the resources and the implementation has been well thought out. And I feel like also when governments are having these discussions, it's very much in silos within themselves, rather than actually talking about the victims of that. So in the Nigerian context, it would probably be the Nigerian engaging gender-based organization, as well as children groups, to kind of see, okay, what is actually happening on ground, and engaging as well with academics, which is probably why I'm doing a PhD, to see, okay, what is the problem? What do we need to solve? Where are we at? To understand the starting point for them to actually think, okay, how can I effectively implement this policy or this legal change? So to me, that's what it looks like. I'm hoping that my PhD research can highlight the vulnerabilities for them to actually think about, actually, this is why it's not working and this is why we probably need to change it, which is a huge ambition. But I feel like as long as it's able to create a conversation, I feel like I'm a step, or we will be a step closer to the solution.
That's amazing, super inspiring. I've got another question. Sorry, I'm stealing the question time for everyone else. But if you have any other questions, please feel free to put it in the chat as well, or you can unmute yourself after I've asked this question. So the next question for me is, here, the ladies on here are aspiring full stack developers, and some people may end up going to create their own products. So they may go to create their own apps, they may go to create their own web platforms and things like that. We have companies like Facebook who have, one of the probably major challenges for them is understanding how to actually tackle cybersecurity on the Facebook platform. So what tips and advice would you give to the ladies on here who maybe have the ambition to be able to create their own disruptive product to make sure that it is as safe as possible for the globe and for everybody, and to make sure that it's also addressing those human rights factors as well?
Yeah, I would say, because it's such a huge problem, it will probably for you to start about what are you trying to tackle. So funny enough, I have a podcast where I actually talk about these things, and the last conversation we had was looking at period apps and thinking about how do you ensure, your data is safe on those apps and what is already available there. So there are people who are already disrupting different spaces. So it's to kind of see what has already been done before. What do they focus on? So it's looking at like your competitors' analysis and seeing ways, how can my product actually benefit? How can it take lessons from that? So although a period app might not be similar to your product, but you can kind of understand what concepts, what steps did they take to ensure that their app is quite safe, to think about, okay, I can take some of the principles that they've done and implement it in my own products. So I would say it's a lot of research to kind of see what's already out there. One organization I would definitely recommend everyone to check out is Firefox. They do an amazing Firefox/Mozilla. Or look at Mozilla Foundation. They do a lot of work in this space, and sometimes they actually give money to those who are working in the privacy front. And from there, you kind of be able to kind of see what other organizations are doing, but also you can kind of see what topics are being kind of discussed about, whether that's topics to have to do with privacy, or it could even be topics to have to do with how open is the internet, or how open are certain social media networks, or is it just ad driven? So it's I would say like the first point would be research, but also looking at organizations like Mozilla Foundation to see what work has been done, what work is there, and what people are willing to fund for it. Because one thing I will say, especially working in social entrepreneurship space, is that you also need funding. So it would be good to kind of see like what's already out there and what people are discussing around. I don't know if that answered the question.
It does. Thank you so much. Thank you. Do we have any last questions for Stephanie whilst she's here with us?
I was going to ask a question actually. So one thing, like I've been a developer for ages and I'm always like, people are like, oh, do you know about cybersecurity? And my answer is always no, I have no idea. It's actually been quite nice to hear some of the stuff you've said and realize that I do know a little bit, because there's probably things that as developers you kind of have to, that you do naturally, if you know what I mean, that fit within cybersecurity, which is quite nice. But I guess my question was to do with, given that there's so much growth now, like everything is going to have tech and tech everywhere. Does that mean that you think there's going to be quite a large demand for people with these skills, with cybersecurity skills? Is it definitely something that we're going to need to get into?
Yeah, I'll definitely say that. I mean, with the figures I gave, with there being 3.5 million global jobs on field, that was taken in late 2018. That's when that was written. And if that's the estimation, you can just imagine how higher that demand is going to be. And unfortunately, there's just not enough people with the cybersecurity skills. And because of that, we're having this gap. Another report, actually two reports I would recommend everyone to go look at. DCMS did a cybersecurity skills report, which kind of I was talking about when I said the industry is 15% women and 16% people from minority groups. That shows the lack of diversity, but also shows that even 35% of the jobs are from word of mouth. So even the jobs are not even available for people to see what jobs are actually out there. So you can kind of see the issues that exist within cybersecurity. But also KPMG also did a recent report as well, I believe with the NCSS, and that has to do with more of like how people are actually treated within the cybersecurity field. So you can kind of see what issues are affecting women in the field. And interesting enough, Black women were those who were highly discriminated against, which I'm not surprised. But again, it kind of shows you like the problem that exists with people trying to get into the field, but also people trying to stay in the field. So I would say, yes, it's a huge demand. And yes, there's problems. I wouldn't want to say that, this is great and you're not going to encounter any problems. But do you think about it in the long run? If we have more people in the field, a lot of safety is going to be taken into consideration, especially safety for those women of color. So I'll definitely suggest, if you do want to get into it, please get into it. I'm always happy to like discuss, which is why I did City in the first place, to try and get more women into the field. But yeah, definitely get in if it's something that you feel compelled to. But I would say again, it's not an easy field.
Thank
awesome.
You. That's useful.
Thank you so much. Do you want to do you mind sharing your details so that if anyone wants to get in touch with you, maybe your LinkedIn or anything like that, to discuss more about cybersecurity, they can get in touch with you?
Yes, so you can get in touch with me through my LinkedIn, which is Stephanie Itimi. I think my name is here, so you can kind of like take my name down. Through Sadia, we're currently working on some courses, yay, to make it things a lot more accessible and easy, because like I said, certification, especially in the UK, it's a joke. No one should be paying 2,000 for something that isn't worth that amount of money. But also, if you want to kind of like discuss on a, I guess, less formal platform, my name is Afro Cherie. I'll put it in the chat. Afro Cherie on Twitter and on Instagram. And sometimes I'm a little bit more responsive there as well. So feel free to contact me anyhow you feel, or how you feel more comfortable with. But yeah, I would say like those are my best contacts.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's really been informative, and it's really, really kind of helped kind of widen our scope, because obviously technology is not just about software development. There's various other areas as well. So thank you so much for giving up your Saturday evening to come and just to speak to us about cybersecurity. Really, really, really appreciate you. So can we just send some love to Stephanie in the chat? So can you say thank you, Stephanie, or send some hearts or something, just to make sure that she feels honored and welcome? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Desiree.
Thank you, Desiree. Thank you. Oh, I'm seeing the love. I appreciate it.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So just some quick announcements. I'm going to just put a form on. So as you guys know, we are giving out some care packages. to you guys, because we really just want to appreciate you for all of your hard work. So I've just put a form link on there. So if you are part of the bootcamp, please fill that form in so we can know your t-shirt size and your phone type, so we can send you some care packages. Also, if you haven't filled in the feedback forms for this week, please do. It's all available on the Slack channels as well. So yeah, I believe that's it. Charlene, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add.
I was just going to add a little bit. When you started announcing stuff, I was like, aha. The people who are on the boot camp, we've just launched Code and Chill for Saturday afternoons. So that's a chance for you all to get together and just do some coding together. There are no instructors, no volunteers, although the volunteers and mentors are invited. They can come along if they'd like to. But if you want to just get together and code together on your homework and stuff, then do get involved. Like, it's between 1 and 3, but you can stay for later if you want to. That's it.
Awesome. All right, have your evenings back again, and thank you so much. We will see you next Friday. I've not announced to see it on the Slack channel, but we're going to be doing a quiz night by popular demand. We're going to talk about pop, popular music. We're going to talk about a bit of tech, and we'll get to see how much knowledge you have about Black women in tech and women in tech in general. So don't miss it. Bring some coffee, cocktails, mocktails, whatever you feel comfortable with. In fact, you can bring some noodles as well if you want. And it's going to be via Kahoot. So anyone that's been on Kahoot before knows that stuff gets heated. So we want you to bring your competitive spirit with you next Friday. And we're going to try and do these quiz nights I believe once every month, so that there's a bit of a community vibe, because obviously we're not able to be in a classroom and we want you guys to be as connected as possible. So yeah, people are going to be eating noodles. I'm going to try and cook some Indomie. I'm Nigerian, so I like my Indomie. So I'll bring my Indomie along with me on Friday. Okay, I will see you guys soon. Have a fantastic rest of your weekend, and bye everyone.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye everyone. Thank you for having me.